The paradox is this: in the richest nation on earth, with record corporate profits and roaring stock indexes, 1 in 4 American families now lives as if every payday were a lifeline thrown into deep water rather than a step on dry land towards security and dignity. The United States has never produced so much, yet an astonishing share of its citizens cannot afford a single serious financial mistake without risking the roof over their heads or the food on their table. This contradiction is not an accident, nor is it a moral indictment of individual workers. It is the predictable outcome of an economic and psychological structure that trains people to chase lifestyle over margin of safety, speculation over savings, and image over substance. The modern American household has been placed on a thin financial ledge while the culture urges it to dance. In my time, I often warned that the investor's greatest enemy is not the stock market, but himself. Today, the American family is not only an investor in securities when it participates in 401ks or IRAs, it is an involuntary investor in the macroeconomy itself, exposed every day to the hazards of inflation, housing costs, debt, and job insecurity. When nearly 24% of households are classified as living paycheck to paycheck in 2025, that is not a statistic. It is a national balance sheet showing inadequate reserves and excessive leverage in the lives of ordinary people. To understand why 1 in 4 families lives on this narrow edge, one must first understand the temperament and incentives of the character I always called Mr. Market. Mr. Market is not merely a figure at the stock exchange. Today, Mr. Market has moved into Main Street and into every home with a smartphone and an internet connection. He whispers through every push notification from a shopping app, every ad for a new car financed over 7 years, every social media post showing a vacation funded by a credit card. He appears smiling in the form of easy monthly payments and flexible credit lines. Mr. Market has one job: to persuade the American household that today's desires matter more than tomorrow's safety. He is the salesman of impatience. When wages stagnate but lifestyle expectations rise, Mr. Market's solution is not restraint, but leverage. Why wait, he suggests, when you can buy now and stretch the payments over years? The result is predictable. Families do not build capital, they rent it at high cost. The irony is that many of these families are doing everything they were told is right. They work hard, they participate in the economy, and they spend in line with what the culture signals as normal. Yet the economic ground beneath them has shifted. Prices for housing, childcare, medical care, and education have grown far faster than their incomes, so that even a disciplined family finds its margin of safety eroded. In the value investing framework, one demands a margin of safety, a buffer between what is paid and what an asset is worth, so that errors and accidents do not wipe out capital. The American family, however, has been funneled into a way of life that leaves almost no margin between income and expenses. Nearly 24% of households are in a condition where any interruption in pay, an illness, a layoff, an unexpected bill can trigger cascading financial distress. This is an economy built on razor-thin household margins. There are 5 principal forces that push families to live at this edge: the cost of living outpacing wages, the the collapse of personal saving habits, the normalization of household debt as a way of life, the precarious nature of modern work, and a cultural psychology that equates consumption with success. None of these are purely personal failings. They are systemic conditions created and reinforced by Mr. Market's relentless salesmanship. Consider first the arithmetic, the cost of necessities. In many regions, housing consumes 30% or more of household income, often much more for renters in major metropolitan areas. Basic necessities, housing, food, transportation, health care, and child care have risen in cost to the point where a substantial share of the middle class cannot afford them without strain. As of 2023, roughly 1/3 of middle-class families could not afford basic necessities in their communities, a stark indicator that the problem is not limited to the poor. When the essentials take most of the paycheck, the remaining funds for saving or investing tend toward zero. At the same time, the personal saving rate in the United States stands at roughly 5% of disposable income, well below its long-term average of almost 9%. That is not merely a number, it is an X-ray of the national character as it relates to financial prudence. When savings are low, families must lean on credit to bridge emergencies, opportunities, and even predictable expenses. This inversion, using credit where savings ought to be, turns households into over-leveraged enterprises, vulnerable to any downturn. Examine a typical American family through the lens one would apply to a business. The income statement reveals wages barely keeping pace with cost of living. The balance sheet reveals high-interest liabilities, credit cards, auto loans, sometimes medical debt, offset by minimal liquid assets. The cash flow statement reveals a dangerous pattern. Inflows from wages matched nearly dollar for dollar by outflows to fixed costs and debt service. In value investing, one would never buy such a business at a premium price, yet millions live this way because the structure of the economy and the messages of the culture have made it the default mode. The modern labor market adds another layer of fragility. While official surveys show that most adults still report they are doing at least okay or living comfortably, this masks a deep anxiety about the future. The rise of gig work, contract employment, and unpredictable schedules has turned what used to be secure paychecks into something more conditional and contingent. Workers may feel one step away from a pay cut or job loss, yet their financial obligations are fixed and inflexible. In such an environment, Mr. Market's daily mood swings do not only affect stock prices, they affect the security of jobs and the stability of incomes. A mild economic slowdown can ripple outward, tightening credit, constricting hours, and reducing overtime. The family that was barely balancing its monthly budget is quickly in deficit. When roughly 24% of households are living paycheck to paycheck, even in a non-crisis year, it means millions are constantly playing financial defense with no reserves to counterattack or seize opportunity. Debt in this story is the silent co-author. In theory, consumer credit can smooth consumption and help families weather temporary shocks. In practice, high-cost debt often becomes a permanent companion. Rising costs, especially for health care and education, have led many families to rely heavily on loans and revolving credit. The interest expense then eats into future paychecks, shrinking the margin of safety for years. This is analogous to an investor buying a high-priced stock with borrowed money. If all goes well, the leverage appears to work in his favor. But when prices stagnate or fall, or when unforeseen expenses arise, the same leverage magnifies the damage. For the household, leverage takes the form of credit card balances that never quite get paid off, auto loans extended over longer terms, and mortgages that stretch to the limits of what the bank's formula allows. Each of these commitments reduces flexibility. The culture surrounding these financial choices deserves scrutiny. In baseball, a hitter who swings for the fences every at-bat may produce exciting home runs, but he will also rack up strikeouts. A great team cannot be built on spectacle alone. It requires consistent singles, disciplined at-bats, and strong defense. The American financial culture, however, praises home runs, big houses, luxury cars, lavish vacations, while sneering at the quiet virtue of living below one's means. Mr. Market, as the antagonist in this drama, appears friendly but is fundamentally indifferent to the fate of the small investor or the ordinary household. He offers constant price quotes, endless credit, new products, and fashionable narratives. He encourages comparing one's life not to one's needs and long-term goals, but to the lifestyles of neighbors, colleagues, and celebrities. The result is status-driven spending that often extends far beyond financial capacity. Yet it is too simple to place all blame on external forces. To regain control, the American family must construct what might be called a fortress of reason, a deliberate, principled approach to money that resists the emotional sway of Mr. Market. This fortress rests on several pillars: clarity about true needs versus cultural wants, commitment to saving as a non-negotiable expense, avoidance of unnecessary leverage, and an investing philosophy that prizes safety over excitement. First, clarity about needs. A family that cannot distinguish between necessities and mere symbols of status will always be vulnerable to marketing and envy. The American dream, rightly understood, is not about owning the largest house or the newest car, but about securing independence, the ability to withstand bad luck, and to choose one's path without financial coercion. The market culture has subtly rewritten this dream as a story of perpetual consumption. Reclaiming the original requires deliberate reflection and often a willingness to appear modest in a culture that celebrates spectacle. Second, saving must be reinstalled as a fixed cost, not a leftover. In corporate finance, a company that fails to retain earnings cannot expand or protect itself in downturns. Likewise, a household that waits to save whatever is left will find that nothing is left. The present reality is that the U.S. personal saving rate has drifted downward from its higher levels decades ago to around 5%. An outcome closely associated with rising financial vulnerability and dependence on credit. A household fortress begins with reversing this order. Pay yourself first, then arrange your lifestyle beneath that line. Third, the avoidance of unnecessary leverage. In one of the core teachings of value investing is that debt converts ordinary volatility into potential catastrophe. The same principle applies to family life. Certain debts may be unavoidable or even constructive, such as a reasonably sized mortgage in a stable job environment. But much of modern household debt is incurred for rapidly depreciating assets or fleeting experiences. The price is not only interest paid, it is the loss of optionality. A heavily indebted family has little room to maneuver when opportunities appear or when hardships arise. Fourth, a sober investing philosophy. Many Americans participate in the market through retirement accounts, yet they often do so with a speculative mindset, chasing recent winners or reacting emotionally to short-term fluctuations. The very same Mr. Market who tempts them to overspend also tempts them to overtrade. A defensive investor, in contrast, accepts moderate returns in exchange for high reliability. The goal is not to beat the market, but to achieve the personal objective of financial security with the least possible risk. The problem, of course, is that institutions and incentives around the American household do not naturally guide people toward this fortress of reason. Schools seldom teach practical financial literacy at depth. Employers may provide retirement plans, but rarely offer robust education about risk, savings, and long-term planning. The wider culture, shaped by advertising and digital platforms, emphasizes instant gratification. Under such conditions, the median family's natural tendency is to live near the edge, and the statistics reflect this. Nearly 1 in 4 households living paycheck to paycheck, with lower-income households even more exposed. Yet there is cause for cautious optimism. History shows that when people are confronted clearly with the consequences of their habits and given principles they can understand and apply, they can change. During earlier periods, households saved more, lived with less leverage, and accepted a slower path to visible prosperity. Today's Americans are not less capable. They're simply swimming upstream against stronger currents of temptation and structural cost pressures. To build an inner fortress in such an environment is an act of quiet rebellion, and it requires adopting a different standard of success. Instead of asking, "What can my income buy this month?" the prudent family asks, "How much independence can my income purchase over the next decade?" That shift in question reframes consumption decisions and tempers the sting of social comparison. A dependable savings habit, even at modest levels, becomes a declaration of sovereignty in an economy that profits from your dependency. One might ask, is it realistic to expect families already under strain to save more or reduce debt? The answer lies not in harsh judgment, but in strategic prioritization. Many households cannot dramatically alter their income in the short term, nor can they instantly escape high-cost regions or obligations. But they can begin to reassert control at the margins by treating savings as essential, by resisting incremental lifestyle inflation when incomes improve, and by directing any surplus first to debt reduction and emergency reserves rather than to new recurring expenses. Here it is useful to recall that in investing, small advantages compounded over long periods create immense differences in outcome. The same is true for households. A consistent, modest surplus protected and invested sensibly, can over years transform a paycheck-to-paycheck existence into one with a buffer. The critical step is to exit the mindset that views the next paycheck as the only lifeline, and instead to view each paycheck as raw material for building a more permanent structure. Why then does the situation remain so pervasive? Because the opposing forces are powerful. Inflation, even at moderate levels, quietly erodes purchasing power, and the recent years of elevated prices have left many families feeling as though they are running hard merely to stand still. The cost of essentials in many regions means that a family can behave prudently and still find itself with too little margin. Add to this the weight of legacy debts, the uncertainties of employment, and the seductive appeals of consumer culture, and one can see why so many households hover at the financial brink. The task, therefore, is not to scold the American family, but to arm it. The fortress of reason is not a fantasy. It is a structure built from sober assessment of risk, disciplined saving, and a refusal to let Mr. Market dictate one's self-worth. It recognizes that the American dream, stripped of marketing, is fundamentally a dream of freedom. The freedom not to fear the mailbox, the phone call from the bank, or the next economic headline. In colonial New England, families often lived with an ethic of thrift, not because they were joyless, but because the winter was real and unforgiving. They understood that harvest time was not a season for extravagance, but for preparation. Today's winter takes a different form: unexpected layoffs, medical bills, recessions, market downturns, but the principle remains. The prudent family stores grain in its granary, even when neighbors appear to feast. The statistics of paycheck-to-paycheck living show that many households have been consuming as if endless summer had arrived, often encouraged by institutions that profit from that optimism. Rebuilding a culture of margin of safety will not happen overnight, and it will not be achieved by slogans. It will require individuals deciding that financial peace is more worth than public display, that a paid-off car is more impressive than a new one financed at 7%, and that an emergency fund is more liberating than a luxury vacation funded by plastic. It will require seeing Mr. Market not as a guru to follow, but as a moody partner whose offers must be evaluated coldly and often refused. The dignity of financial peace lies not in the amount of wealth accumulated, but in the degree of dependence avoided. A family with modest income, low debt, and a steady buffer of savings may, in the eyes of the culture, appear unremarkable. Yet in the deeper sense, it is far richer than the high-earning household that lives at the limit of its salary with no room for error. The statistics that show nearly a quarter of households living paycheck to paycheck tell us that many have been drawn into a contest they cannot win on its current terms. The path forward is to redefine the contest. The goal is not to keep up with a neighbor's conspicuous consumption, but to quietly accumulate resilience. It is to use the tools of finance, credit, markets, insurance on one's own terms, not as dictated by Mr. Market's latest fashions. It is to remember that true wealth is not measured by the volume of spending, but by the degree of control over one's time and choices. When you ask why 1 in 4 families in the United States lives on the edge of its salary, the answer is both simple and profound. Too little margin of safety in a culture and economy that reward living without it. The remedy is the same that has protected investors for generations. Adopt a defensive posture, insist on a margin, and refuse to let the emotional tides of the market, whether in stocks, housing, or lifestyle, determine your fate. Your greatest asset is not your income, but your capacity to think and act independently of Mr. Market. If enough American families build such fortresses of reason, the statistics will change, and with them the character of the economy itself. A nation of households living with buffers and prudence is not only safer individually, it is more stable collectively. Until then, Mr. Market will continue to sell a glittering but fragile dream, and too many will buy it at the cost of their peace.